Welcome, everybody. We are live on YouTube. We are so honored to have you here and honored to have this conversation today with Dr. Zornberg about Moses, a Human Life. I'm Lizzie Frankel. I'm a Communications and Marketing Associate for Sefaria, and we would like to welcome you to today's conversation. Before we get the event started, we would like to dedicate today's learning to those who died or were wounded in Meron. It was a horrible tragedy, and we pray that their memories may be for a blessing and that our study may uplift their memories today. In case you're new to Sefaria, welcome to Sefaria. We are a free virtual Jewish library, and our mission is to make Torah accessible for everyone. We are especially thankful to our donors who make Sefaria's work possible. We are a nonprofit and we rely on their support. We are thankful to have you here, especially thankful for our sustainers who make monthly donations that make events and text releases like this possible. Today, we have the absolute honor and joy of delving into Torah learning with Dr. Avivah Gottlieb Zornberg, who is one of the newest authors to join Sefaria's library. Her book, Moses, A Human Life, is part of the prize-winning Jewish Lives series. We are so thankful to Jewish Lives for making it possible to have this text on Sefaria, on our website and our app, and we encourage you to read the book if you have not already. We're so thankful. We are also grateful to have live captioning for today's event. Our captioner, Molly, is here typing the words that I am attempting to say ever so slowly. Please feel free to share your questions in the chat throughout. We do have a special group of people on Zoom today joining us who will be asking their questions live. Many of these people are Sefaria sustainers who make monthly donations that make our work possible, and others are board members and other committed Sefaria users, and we're thankful that they're here with us on Zoom today. If you are on YouTube Live, please still share your questions in the chat, and we hope that we will be able to either ask them or someone on the Zoom will be asking a similar question towards the end. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our amazing speakers today. Dr. Avivah Gottlieb Zornberg is one of the newest authors to join Sefaria's library. She's the author of Moses, A Human Life, which we will be discussing today. Dr. Zornberg lectures on the Hebrew Bible and rabbinic thought at academic, psychoanalytic, and Jewish educational institutions around the world. Welcome, Dr. Zornberg. We are so delighted to have you here. Dr. Zornberg will be joined in conversation today by Dr. Elana Stein Hain. Dr. Stein Hain is a valued board member of Sefaria, as well as the director of faculty and a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. Dr. Stein Hain is passionate about bringing rabbinic thought into conversation with contemporary life, which I believe we are about to do in this conversation. Dr. Zornberg and Dr. Stein Hain, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. Thinking a lot about Meron today, we often say when we're consoling someone, Hamakom Yenachem Etchem B'toch Sha'ar V'Letzion V'Yerushalayim, that you should be comforted by God among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. But I think the notion of the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem is really palpable for the Jewish people this weekend, just really wishing comfort to the bereaved families and a refuah shlema, a speedy and full recovery to those who have been injured in this terrible affair. So being on the Sefaria board, I recognize that trying to keep up with the Jewish people and its library and its consistent flow of ideas is incredibly challenging. And we are so honored that Dr. Zornberg, that you are joining our digital library of the Jewish people. And I want to start by asking you about your process in writing about Moses. I mean, it's almost an impossible task. He's such a larger than life figure. So much has been written about him. And it's interesting to notice that in your book, you present him as both larger than life and also someone who's exemplary of the human experience more generally. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us about the process as you wrote about him and his family and him and God and him and himself and him and the people. Where did this come from for you? How did you organize your thoughts around this? What was even your starting point?
Well, that's an excellent but very large question. I suppose processes are hard to trace. It's hard to trace the beginning. You could say simply that the invitation to do this was what began a certain, in a way, non-obvious process. I think at first I actually refused because I just thought there's something a little off about writing biography of Moshe. In terms of a certain reverence one has for Moshe, that there never was any other prophet like him. There's something about Moshe, about Moses, that is incommensurate. That's a rather long word for that idea that he can't be compared to anyone else, almost like God himself. And of course, that's a dangerous thought. You keep on insisting, no, Moshe was born, he died, he married, he had children, he was not God. And yet, he had a completely unique relationship with God, as the Torah insists itself. Lo kam ke Moshe od navi b'Yisrael. There never was any other person who communicated with God like Moshe. So he's of an order by himself. And when I'm starting off with that feeling, I felt that biography is perhaps the wrong word, and what I have to write doesn't belong in Jewish lives. I just felt it was slightly inappropriate. Aside from that, Moshe is a very mysterious figure and very hard to write about. That's a different question. About the first question, I think I was persuaded to do it by the sense that sometimes the slightly inappropriate provides a little jolt that just gets the traffic moving in a slightly different way. Suddenly you can see, you see Moshe. I've seen him all my life. I've been involved with him all my life. If I had to take that back to the beginning, it would be from the Aleph Bet, from when I learned the letters. Who could not be fascinated with Moshe, and feeling for Moshe as a human being? The scene in which he prays to God to let him cross over the river and achieve his heart's desire, the one thing he wanted, which was to enter the Holy Land, and that he is refused, and that he tells the people about this unexpected scene with God, God's cruelty. Use the word cruelty because the Midrash uses it. There's an achzariyut about God's not listening to him, not listening to someone. And Moshe, the pathos of Moshe, always haunted me, as it does many people. I have many friends who cry, they're women friends, who cry when that parsha is read, because of that sense that, as far as I understand it, that Moshe, from the beginning of his life, felt unheard. That's one of the basic themes. They will not listen to me. And indeed, they don't listen to him. God says they will listen to you, but they really don't. So it immediately sets up something that's irresolvable. Do they listen? How could God say they will listen if actually they don't listen, as it says? And so I gradually was drawn into the enigmas, I would say, of Moshe's personality, his fate, and his way of talking or claiming that he can't talk to God and to his people. It's like has to develop two voices. In a real sense, he seems to me a modern, someone who speaks to us uniquely, not in one voice, but in the two voices, the double voicedness. There are those peoples, those tribes somewhere in Asia where they develop a certain kind of double voiced singing, which comes from two
Yes.
different places in the body.
Yes.
And sometimes more voices simultaneously. The ability, and this is a man who can't speak. So I was just more and more, the deeper I got into the Midrashic sources, the more fascinated I got, and the more I felt that he is both unique, and in his uniqueness and in his strangeness, and he is strange, he is also like us. That we also have something of Moshe in us, and we can relate to him from our humanity. We don't have to be a theologian to relate to Moshe, and that, I think, was what kept me going. That the doubleness of his singularity and his solidarity with the people, and his representation of every man, every Jew.
Well, what's so interesting is that you really do pierce the veil, even the way that you're speaking now, saying there was something cruel. I would only say it because the rabbi said it. There's something strange, but it really is, and the Midrash talks about it. So I'm wondering if you see your project, because the way that you write about Bible, about Tanakh, is so midrashic. Do you see your project as continuing the rabbinic legacy of essentially finding the fissures in the text, seeing the enigma, and being willing to fill them in, those gaps, in a way that brings the characters closer rather than making them more mysterious or more exalted necessarily?
Yes, except that I always have a little twinge of discomfort when my project is regarded as sort of the taking off from the rabbis. I don't regard myself as a continuation of the rabbis in that sense, but in the sense of a kind of there's an inner feeling that this is what we are supposed to do, that this is the right thing to take, not to take a whole and tell everyone you be like that, but actually to take fragments, to take a fragmented person, to take someone who has different personae, has two mothers. What would that do to a person who has two mothers, who in the end doesn't really have a wife, he doesn't really have children, although he has both, and he doesn't get what he wanted.
So it's interesting. You're speaking in double, which I love, meaning you're saying at the same time, I have this reverence and I have this need to pull it close. And I want to talk about fragmentation for a little bit, because we live in a culture that is so obsessed with trying to smooth out the edges. We have to feel whole. We have to feel relaxed. We have to go on vacation. But your writing, and in this book is no exception, your writing tends to focus on the kind of growth that comes out of fragmentation, tensions with one's own identity, exile from oneself. And living through this corona pandemic, we're living in fragmentation. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are in experiencing Moses everywhere right now, and not only with the pandemic, with the polarizations, with the divisiveness, and what your attitude is towards all of this fragmentation, and how we can grow from it, and how we should grow from it as people, as communities, as a society. Because many people just want to fix it. It doesn't seem like you seek to fix as much as you look for growth.
I think my project is a little different from the rabbis in that I try to avoid the word should. I try to avoid the sense of the obligatory, which of course is central to halakha. Sure. What I do is not halachic. It arises out of my own sense of the difficulty of life. And my attempt to understand my own life as something given by God. And which means a willingness to stay with the discomforts and the brokenness and what the Hasidic writers like to call the chisaron, the lack in life. There's something missing always, and that's where desire comes from. If you're all whole, then what do you want, really? And without desire, I really see that as the key in the largest sense. Desire meaning always in this world, ba'olam hazeh, olam haba, the other world, different story. But in this world, we are incomplete by the nature of who we are. With the gift of Torah, with all the gifts that we've been given, the heritages, we start off life and we live through life, it seems to me, um, navigating, trying to find a way to achieve desire and never achieving it entirely. And that's what keeps us going. There are moments of wholeness, I would think, for many people, but there are moments, there's special gifts. And otherwise, it seems to me that if Moshe breaks the tablets, which are the gift of God, whole, solid pieces of stone, a symbol of permanence, that the Torah, the Ten Commandments, is written on these stones, and then in anger, he breaks those tablets. I'm not altogether surprised when, again, the Chachamim, the sages, say outrageously that God congratulates Moshe for breaking the tablets. Yeshar kochacha, more strength to you that you broke those tablets. In other words, that Moshe made a gesture in protest against idolatry. The idolatry of I must have things whole. Things that's a kind of idolatry. Whereas God is the one who is whole, and his Torah is whole, but we are not whole. And we try, it seems to me that Moshe is here, it's an act that comes out of himself, and God doesn't disapprove of it in this Midrashic tradition. God actually approves of it and lets him know that he sees it as symbolic in some way of the issues in human life about consciousness, about memory. That memory is never complete. One always forgets. What a human being is, a lomed v'shocheach. That's the definition of the human being, learning and forgetting. And it's absolutely true that we are constantly in the process of learning and forgetting what we know. And then we try to remember and we try to shore up our knowledge. We don't want to forget, but inevitably we forget. And that gives our unconscious lives a chance to flourish, that we don't have everything on the surface. That somewhere we have to, in the shadows, we have to invent for ourselves. We have to interpret. We have to fill in the gaps that are there anyway. So that's so my feeling is that Corona is an exacerbated case of that, what we are living through now. And I'm not saying it's a blessed state by any means. On the contrary, it has many prices to pay, but it is a human state. It's still a human state, and we should help each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very touched. I'm very touched by the way you cite Kafka as essentially saying, Moshe not going into the land of Israel or the land of Canaan at the time is really just exemplary of a human life. And the way you're talking about it now, it's that dual lens. It's tragic, but it also creates a sense of meaning.
Yes.
That of where desire comes from. That's really it's really quite profound, and I hope helpful to people who are listening, especially during this difficult time. I want to move to a different piece of the fragmentation, which is less about Moses being sure of himself and almost, I viewed it almost as a seesaw. Moses in the middle, God is at one side, the people are at the other. And at the time when Moses is feeling close to God, he's very far from the people. And at the time when he's feeling closer to the people, he has to be able to say to God, I'm actually choosing the people over the intimacy of our relationship. Can you reflect on what that means for our own spiritual lives? The relationship between us and God on the one hand and us and people on the other, even if it's less dramatic than the way that Moshe has to decide whether he's going to give up his people or give up his intimacy with God.
I could answer with a kind of translation into our lives of an example of it is possible to go off into spiritual raptures or into intellectual raptures when one learns Torah. You get ecstatic about what you're learning and not notice the baby crying next door. That's a classic Hasidic. And it wasn't to do with women, it was to do with men. A man is learning and a baby is crying next door, and his rabbi tells him, don't you hear the baby? And it becomes an image for relating to people in general. But I'm not so much interested, so I said that. but
you tick the box. You said it.
Okay. I'm not so much interested in learning lessons, I have to say. It's something that I'm almost averse to. I think the effect of Torah is much more indirect. It's much more underground. It's oblique. It speaks to us indirect. Let's say this example that comes to my mind. Focusing on Moshe, not thinking about ourselves, first of all. That God says to Moses at the top of the mountain twice, when he gives the Torah and when the golden calf. Lech red, get on down the mountain. In other words, leave me. God compels Moses to leave him, the spiritual ecstasies of being with him, and says to him, go down there. That's your place with the people. Lech red migdulatcha, the sages say. Go down from your greatness. The sense of greatness that Moses has is when he's talking to God. It seems to me almost entirely. That's when he knows that he's born for a unique purpose, for a certain kind of connection with God. And God, at crucial moments, sends Moses back down, almost expels him. It's again a little harsh. What do I need you for? That's what the sages say. What do I need you for if really I created you for them? So from God's point of view, it's Bishvil Yisrael. Everything is for the sake of Israel, including the ecstasies. The ecstasies are there to be then brought down to the people in some form. And when I think of it that way, here I have Moses, as you say, divided between the two. But God himself, puts his finger in the scale and says, no, not me, them. And the same thing happens when he in that poignant scene when he asks to go into the land of Israel. And God says to him, enough, Ravlecha, don't speak to me anymore about this matter. And if you put the emphasis on to me, then you read it that God is really saying to Moses, that issue is closed. You will not go into the land of Israel. But there's another horizon, which is really what your vocation is. Go down to them and see what can be done with them still before you die. Things have not been so terribly successful with them. That was not your preferred relationship, the relationship with the people. He loves the people, it seems to me, but he's very handicapped in communicating with them.
Sure.
A lot of anger, a lot of rebellion. His anger, their rebellion. It's the dark story in a way. And it seems to me that in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses learns to speak to the people in a different way, certainly through the Midrashic lens. Once one reads the Midrash, then I think one sees that there's a movement that finally Moses comes to opt for the people with the full weight of what he has taken in from God. That's his hard job. That's something where he really has to change.
Right, his ability to expose himself to the people. I'm taking that throughout the book. You talk about him as the man who was born into a world that wanted him dead. Meaning, to me, that it just puts an entirely different spin on this human being's life. I'm wondering, and I'm going to do something bold, and feel free to take the fifth here. At least the way we would speak about it in New York, take the fifth. That I'm wondering how writing a book like this impacts you in your own religious life, in your own relationship to Torah. Did your relationship with Moshe change, with God, with the Bible? With how is Dr. Zornberg different from the beginning of writing this book to the final incredibly moving passage of this book?
Well, it's a two-way street. What can I say? It changed me, and I certainly changed it. I mean, I read using my own experience, imagination. I think the fact that I am a second-generation Holocaust survivor brought me in a very particular relationship to Egypt and the slavery of Egypt and the trauma of Moses, as you say, as I say, you say, a child who was born to be killed. That was the only destiny at that point. And the effect on his relations with his mother, the strange nursing, the broken nursing, going back to the most intimate beginning of his life. This is the psychoanalytic aspect of it that I'm so involved in. This all was me. It was somehow. I have no doubt that I was deeply affected by my parents' experience, and as I'm not the only one, I guess, everyone. So it just felt very personal, as I showed by referencing Paul Celan and Sebald.
Yeah.
Great, the greatest writers of the 20th century, I might say.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I was reading the book and I saw the Holocaust, identity after the Holocaust, living in the shadow of the Holocaust, I was actually wondering where that came from. Meaning, I understand that the Egypt is the parallel, but it's really fascinating that you say it's autobiographical. And I think, it brings me to a slightly different question. I would say a Sefaria kind of question, which is, I said to myself, this book is now going to be digitized, which means we have a lot of access to the analytics of this book. We can see what words are used, how many times, and that sometimes can open a window to what might be a thread that was chosen to be more minor as opposed to the major threads which stand out more. So when I looked at literally the top 50 words that were used in this book, God certainly ranked very high up there. Moses was 1,000 times, and God was 714 times, and the people were 352. But more interesting to me is that words, language, speak, voice, mouth, speaks, speech, speaking, hearing, listening, hundreds and hundreds of times, as opposed to a word like power, which showed up 40 times. Many people, when they think about Moses, they think of a powerful human being. We're splitting the sea. We're taking down the largest empire in the ancient world at the time. We're bringing revelation from God to humanity. Is this where the psychoanalysis comes in? That Moses throughout is the man who stammers, the man who's afraid people won't listen, the man who keeps asking, who am I? And as you say, is trying to figure out how to speak to these people, because hitting things is not working. He needs to figure out how to speak. So was this a conscious choice, your choice of Moses as this tender, troubled character, rather than the heroic, or I shouldn't say rather than, the heroism comes through, but tell us about this choice to present him in this way and the focus on language in specific.
Well, it wasn't a conscious choice. It was just obvious to me. I think it's something that, as I say, all my life I've been thinking about him, teaching about him, and writing also in my different books. So by the time I came to write this book, I had formed a fairly fully fleshed out view of him. And I find it hard hitting the rock, hitting the Egyptian, right? You could say he begins his life with acts of violence, hitting the Egyptian to kill him, who the Egyptian was trying to kill the Hebrew. And then at the end of his active life, hitting the rock instead of speaking to it. So his life begins and ends on the wrong note, I would say. These are not positive moments. They're moments of anger, justified as they may be. And Chazal, the Chachamim, the sages are are quite critical when they talk about ongoing appearances of anger in Moses' life. He would get angry and he would forget. Being angry means that you forget the law. That is your weakness. You betray your weakness when you get angry. That's not strength. That's not power. And Moses is angry with the people in that scene with the rock. So the Rambam actually, Maimonides actually says that was the problem. Hitting the rock is just an expression of that anger force in Moses, which is not the positive force, but it is what gives him a certain kind of vitality. And the language is the issue in Moses' life from beginning to end, including what he starts by crying. Right? His voice is right there at the beginning as a baby. What other great hero do we come in on his life at a moment of the crying baby? Why would you bring that into the story? But of course, it's important because that's what arouses Pharaoh's daughter's compassion. And even according to Midrashic sources, she hears the child as in some way representing his nation. Mialdei ha'ivrim. He is a Hebrew child. And so I imagine the princess as hearing the cry as the cry of Israel. And on that basis too, having compassion. So he's representative and he's unique. It's again that sort of, he represents his brothers, whom he doesn't know till he goes out to see them one day in the field. He wants to see these slaves. I suggest even that he doesn't even know they are his brothers. That he wasn't brought up to know he had two homes. As far as we can see, he only is in the princess's house. That's all. She is his mother, and she names him. So again, there's a sense here that it's only through language, through listening and speaking, that he can explore the question of identity. It's language throughout, which culminates in the end in poetry. I don't think that's insignificant in song and poetry, particularly high moments, but returns to prose. Returns then to the struggle.
Yeah, and makes it much more meaningful that Devarim is his book, that he does get
all
to speak his words, all those words.
All those words, as the sages say, yes. Yesterday you said, I'm not a man of words. And today you have so much to say. That's a quote from the Midrash. They're really laughing in a way. It's a kind of joke at his expense, meaning, oh, what happened? It's an affectionate joke. Moshe Rabbeinu, it's a kind of intimacy about it. We know about these things. We know that that's what happens.
Yeah. It's one of the segments that stuck out so vividly as I was reading is where you talk about just how eloquent Moshe is while saying that he's ineloquent.
Yes.
Right? His inability to see his possibility for eloquence.
Yes.
So the beginnings and the ends of his life marked by violence, but also it sounds like marked by speech, whether his cry at the beginning or his beautiful eloquence at the end, making him, as you say, unforgettable, his ability to share his vulnerability. I'm wondering if we can move to the more personal for Moshe, that is not about the people, not only about himself and not about God, but he and Miriam.
Yeah.
You do something magnificent with their relationship of tension and love. I'm wondering if you can say more about how you came to understand that, their relationship, and a little bit about where your afterthought, now that this book is a few years old, how you think about the relationship between Miriam and Moshe.
It speaks to me a great deal because Miriam is effectively, she gave birth to Moses, right? In a very large sense. Again, in the Midrashic traditions, she reunites her parents. When under Pharaoh's decree of killing the baby boys, her parents have separated. Her father is separated from mother. And Miriam is that, that unexpected daughter who is a prophetess in the family, who prophesies to her father that this baby that will be born when you get together again with your wife will save the people. So suddenly she has her one episode of prophecy and persuades her parents to reunite. And then everything goes bad. And the parents blame her for having, here they are with a child who's going to be killed. And they put the child in the water. And they blame her for having caused them to have the child. On some level, it really emerges like that. Her father gives her a little slap in the Midrash and says, so where is your prophecy now? What happened to all that epic promises that God made? And so here she is in the position of prophetess, mother, daughter. A daughter of a father who has shamed her and has sent her into Coventry. And that's a classic sensitivity of fathers and daughters. You know, a particular kind of love that there is between fathers and daughters. That fathers have the power to shame the daughter. And the daughter is very vulnerable to that. And at the same time, you have a daughter who just knows how it is. This is what God said to her. She has her voices. To refer to another great heroine, Joan of Arc, you remember. And it's that she knows. She's had, so to be a prophet and a woman, to be a prophet and a daughter and a mother, Moses is now like her child. And then to see the child, her brother, her child, outgrow her. And so that really touches on very personal things. What, in terms of womanhood and in terms in general of the aspiration to greatness, you know, where are the lines to be drawn? Can one desire infinitely? Where there are other considerations, because one is also something else. You know, so I don't want to be too personal about it, but you know, I think it's really to realize what women are wanting in our generation, is to understand that it's without the usual caveats. It's without the usual, you know, yes, but of course that comes first. So, you know, just to reassure the world that I'm really still, which doesn't mean it doesn't come first. It doesn't. It becomes a kind of defense against a real, I don't know if it's conflict or it's a fruitful conflict anyway, I would say. And it then extends to all human beings. You know, all human beings have human commitments as well as that aspiration for themselves. And there are the complexities around these things.
Yeah, you really humanize the two of them, Moshe and Miriam, in that treatment, and it is just it's just profoundly touching. It really was just profoundly touching to read about the honest siblings, which can be quite fraught, even if there's a lot of love there, and even something redemptive. Pardon?
It just comes down to, in the text, they speak against Moses, Moshe, but the be also means, in the same text, it means through. God speaks through. So the same preposition covers a conflict, that you are both against someone and you have a rivalry with them, you are troubled by them, and you really see yourself in them, that you are in the other person. There's an identification as well as attention.
It's beautiful. Well, I think we're going to stop here for questions from the audience, but what a joy to get to hear from you.
Enjoy very much. Yeah, this has been interesting.
Just getting to read your book and saying, what would I ask the author if she were here? And here she is. So thank you for your generosity.
Thank you.
And being so personal. And I'm going to hand it over, I believe, to Lizzie, who's going to handle our questions online.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much. This has been a real honor to listen to, and we have been receiving some really interesting questions both on YouTube and on Zoom. So for those of you on the live stream with us today on YouTube, we also have a small Zoom audience with us. And so they are going to share some of their questions face to face. The people on Zoom with us today are our dedicated Sefaria users as well as donors, including our monthly sustainers, who we are so grateful to for their support. So to start off our question and answer, feel free to continue submitting your questions throughout, but we'll start off if Dove, you are there and ready to unmute and share your face with us. We saw your question in the chat and would like to open it up to Dr. Zornberg.
Well, I don't know about sharing the face. I might frighten everyone, but no, actually, Dr. Zornberg, it's a pleasure to listen to you, and it's a pleasure to meet you via Zoom. But yeah, you had mentioned that basically that we're not whole and we're not perfect, and because of that, it creates a desire. And to me, that means desire to learn, to become better, to get closer to Hashem, you know, the whole bit. But my question is that when everyone's running around frantically trying to be whole, wouldn't they be better off, instead of trying to fulfill their own egos, wouldn't they be better off just to kind of turn to the Torah, turn to God, and try to learn? That is my question. So
I don't think one contradicts the other. I think obviously being whole has a great deal to do with being with other people in an undefensive way, for instance. To be with other people in a way that doesn't only look to feed oneself. That's part of one's incompleteness, that one is egotistical, that one wants things for oneself, and actually learning to be whole means learning to approach other people, to approach God in a different way. And so it's only through the connection with, you know, with doing things and relationships that one can achieve one's desire of being more whole. But one doesn't do it by sitting by oneself and regarding one's navel, for sure. I wasn't suggesting anything.
no. But when you get it,
there is deep concern, I think, in sensitive people. I can't imagine there's anyone who's not concerned about the ways in which one fails to measure up. One fails to allow oneself to be in life fully, to be in life, to be in Torah, to be in wherever one is, not to be absent, not to be somewhere in a fantasy. And I think that's what I mean by being whole, not fleeing from the reality of life in this world. And that includes, of course, at the heart of it is the religious element, it seems to me. It's
right.
It's a life of mitzvot and so on. But I'm emphasizing the human experience. What do you? It's a kind of phenomenological approach. That is, what is it like? How would I describe it? A life that is whole and a life that is fragmented, and to try to understand where we are. It's a way of understand everyone. I don't think one can get away from the question, who am I? I think that is something that is with you, whether you ignore it or not. But of course, I don't mean to focus purely on the psychological question. I think I said all I really can say about that.
Okay, thank you very much.
I hope I somewhat answered the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have another question here on our Zoom chat. Sherry, would you like to unmute and share your question?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Dr. Zornberg. This was wonderful, and I so thoroughly enjoyed your book on Moses and all your other books. I had a question about, you mentioned the broken tablets, and you also talk about in your book the exile of the word in various places. So I had a question. Do you see a connection between the revelation at Sinai, where the people cannot come close and hear for themselves and need Moshe to mediate for them and relay the words, and the breaking of the tablets, which is also a type of mediation, because those tablets are then destroyed and a new different set of tablets are given to the people. Listening to you today, I was thinking that also is an expression of the exile of the word. So I'd love to hear your take on connecting those two incidents, if you see a connection.
The two incidents being the breaking of the tablets and
Breaking of the tablets and the revelation at Sinai, where the people cannot hear the words directly.
yes. The problem about the breaking of the tablets, I don't think it's a problem, I think it's very interesting, is that they're not destroyed. The fragments of the tablets are not destroyed. They are actually preserved in the Holy Ark inside the tabernacle, along with the new set of tablets. So that changes the whole symbolism. In other words, that's not what we reject. We don't reject the fragments. The fragments are there together with the new whole set to keep us in mind somewhere of the fragmentation element in human experience. The fact that the people need Moshe to mediate, to speak to them, I don't know if that has to do with the exile. They need a human being, that's for sure. They need human speech. They particularly because they're prone to idolatry. That is, if they will make a golden calf, they can make a golden calf out of anything. And they can make a golden calf out of the complete set of tablets as well. They can make a golden calf out of it's kind of pagan impulse that's very strong in them and perhaps in all human beings. And Moses comes to tell them somewhere that Torah is always mediated. It's always in the end. It's not great experiences. It's the words. It's the words that tell. And they are secondary, but they are actually what Torah is all about. It's all about the words and the listening to the words and the interpreting the words and the openness then, right? In a way that the opening up of the mystical experience into something very, very vital, a sense of being in the middle of something and not simply adoring something from afar. So I think the breaking of the tablets becomes a very powerful symbol of the value of being mindful of that aspect of human life. Language is an extraordinarily important theme. I mean, when you talked about the exile of the word, that really is a very important theme that we haven't touched on today, but that is really the main problem of the people. They've lost contact with the language of spirituality, the language of God, and with language in general. They simply don't speak. That is, they're in a way, they're dead. It's a kind of apathy. They're slaves. And the idea is to reawaken desire, which would mean reawakening kind of live interpretation of the words of God, what we call the oral Torah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Zornberg. We'll have a couple more questions here from the audience. I'm wondering if Ruth Roydy Sharon, would you be able to unmute and ask your question? We'll
Good
ask you to
morning.
share.
Good morning. Shalom, and thank you so much, Avivah, for being with us. We love to have access to you always. I'm very interested about the provocative thing you said at the beginning about the importance of longing and desire that comes from not being whole. And so my question is, if Moses was the only one to see God face to face, so that's made very clear, and the rest of us are in a state of longing to have that kind of intimacy, is that really our legacy? Is it a legacy of longing to be whole, longing to see God, longing to understand Torah, longing to be in Israel, longing for peace? It seems like that's our motif.
Yes, and to add fuel to the fire, Moses is no different, because he doesn't get to see God face to face. Actually, if you read the text closely, he asks to see God face to face. And God says, no, you can only see my back. What does that mean? And but there is a definite sense that Moses, like everyone else, like every other human being, he speaks to God face to face. That's really a different thing. But he doesn't see God's face. It's not the mystical experience. It's the distance and all the gap and the need somewhere to work at it by himself, to understand what God has taught him and work on it by himself. And that is the lifelong longing of Moses. He doesn't live a life of oceanic ecstasy, kind of total ecstasy without gaps and without differentiations. On the contrary, I think there is that wonderful Midrash. I don't know if you've read the book, my book. There's the wonderful Midrash about how when the baby is born, an angel comes and strikes the baby on the mouth,
right,
and makes it forget everything it knew before. So, and puts an end, that is, to all the knowledge, the extraordinary knowledge that the baby is born with. And the idea there somewhere, as Maharal understands it, is that by striking the baby on the mouth, the angel is doing two things at once. Is closing the openings to that world, that whole world, and opening up the avenue of speech. And it's through speech and listening that the child will then try to reconstruct something of what he knew. And then Maharal ends with this extraordinary statement that Moses was never struck on the mouth. This is the kind of central theme of my book. In other words, Moses was born different. That he was born with some kind of access to God, which in a way made him less interested in talking. That's why he couldn't talk. He didn't really want to come down into this world, which is a world of language. And then I understand on the basis of that Moses comes to realize through his experience with the people that he has to learn to speak and that he has to leave that other world behind him, and that his destiny is to be the one who has forgotten how to speak because he is now invested in this other world of language, which is like the lifeline of the Jewish people.
Language and longing.
Language and longing. Yes, I think the two are the same. Language is desire. It's always a crossing a gap, and we know as we're speaking, as we're writing, that we're not quite making it. If you know that we're trying.
Right.
But there's always something you can't say.
Right.
You feel that the actual core you haven't managed to put into words, and that's what keeps us going.
Right. Thank you so much. Blessings.
Thank you, Dr. Zornberg. We have one final question. Thank you all so much for your wonderful questions that you've been submitting. I wish we could share all of them. Our final question comes from Felicia Schussler on the Zoom chat. Would you like to unmute and turn on your video to share?
Definitely. Thank you, Dr. Zornberg, so much for speaking today. My question is less about Moshe and a little bit more about the Israelite community that he was in. I'm thinking today specifically about those in our society who, like Moshe, were born into traumatic situations or maybe into broken families and who struggle throughout their lives with anger and violence and connecting to others. What can we learn from Moshe's life about how we can best relate to these people and help them find and share their voice?
Again, I will be I'll be a little obnoxious and say that I don't really believe in learning lessons directly from the Torah. I mean, you'll find that in every other teacher in the world talks about learning lessons, but I, for some reason, don't like that idea so much. I would say rather that the anger, that what we could take in from the whole story of Moses and his angers, etc., his incompletenesses, is the notion that when we're dealing with people who are obviously broken, in more obvious ways, perhaps, the fact that we have become familiar with our own brokennesses and our own, in a way, incompletenesses and defensiveness should sensitize us to the need of the other person. And there's no way we're put into this world just for that purpose. That this person is turning to us, is appealing to us on some level, and we should, there's a should again, but the feeling is that that's what there is to do in the world, to acquire the ability to respond, out of a depth of self-knowledge, which brings you close to other people. So that it's not a narcissistic pursuit. It's a way of understanding more deeply what people go through.
Thank you, and amen. This has been absolutely beautiful. We are so thankful, Dr. Zornberg, that you were able to join us today. And Dr. Stein Hain, so thankful that you were able to facilitate today's conversation. To all of you who asked questions and just shared your presence, we feel you and hear you and are grateful to you. Thank you to those of you on Zoom. Please stick around. We will be opening up your cameras. To those on YouTube, we are grateful that you are here with us. We want to extend our gratitude again to Jewish Lives for allowing us to have Dr. Zornberg's book up on Sefaria. What a huge privilege and honor. And we also want to thank our donors, especially our sustainers who give monthly gifts that allow us to do things like this and make Torah accessible for everyone. If you would like to become a sustainer, we will be putting the link in the chat. It's bit.ly/sustain Sefaria. And again, we thank you so much for your support. Thank you, Molly, for providing the live captions for today's event, as well as the Sefaria members who are facilitating the chats right now. We will be stopping the live YouTube stream, and we will allow you to continue chatting on Zoom if you're here with us on Zoom. If you'd like today's recording, you can go to the YouTube live link that you are currently at anytime. This session will be there for you. And we will also send you a reminder about the recording following the event. So